It was time for our long-awaited Alaskan vacation. After arranging things with local agent Patty Crichton, we flew from Pellston to Detroit, and then from Detroit on to Seattle, and finally to Juneau. We were treated to fantastic views of mountains as we came into the Juneau airport. The next morning, after arising from the Baranoff Hotel, we saw these fantastic mountains and waterfalls all around the city of Juneau. Waterfalls you'd travel hundreds of miles in the UP just to see. We set off around the city and enjoyed the Tlingit Indian motifs and totem poles that we saw around the city. We took a general tour of Juneau, which also treated us to some delightful scenes looking across the inlet. Our tour also included the Mendenhall Glacier, which is just a few minutes from Juneau. So many of these glaciers have fantastic blue ice. Here's a little waterfall that was right near the Mendenhall Glacier. And then we went up on a tram to the top of Mount Roberts, treated again to spectacular vistas of the surrounding mountains. We set off on our Pack Creek Bear Tour. The first day we were stranded at the airport, but the second day we were able to successfully take off. Here we are viewing the airplane from our situation in Pack Creek. We had to wear hip waders to get off the airplane and step off the pontoons into the water and wade to shore along with our guide. This area on Admiralty Island has the thickest concentration of grizzly bears anywhere, about 1 per square mile. Fortunately, the bears are somewhat habituated to humans. That is, they don't tend to run away if they see you from some distance, nor do they tend usually to be aggressive toward people. Years ago, a fellow had adopted a small female bear cub whose mother had been killed. He used to feed it. When it grew up, it brought its own babies back to the Pack Creek area. And over time, there was this kind of truce established between man and bear there. So they haven't had any terrible incidents of bear attacks at Pack Creek, although our guides did have one incident where they had to spray a bear that charged at them. This is the brown bear. We saw quite a few that day, about 8, and we had a mink scampering around on the shoreline. Both of these are after shellfish. And they also enjoy going after the skunk cabbage. Here we are walking up into the hills of Admiralty Island where we saw some more skunk cabbage and bear rubs. And on our plane trip home we saw a humpbacked whale and more bears. And then we're off on our Uncruise. Here is our relatively small vessel, about 250 feet long. We headed from Juneau up into Glacier Bay, down Chatham Strait, across Frederick Sound, into Ford's Terror. Here we see some orcas as we're going into Glacier Bay. And of course the phenomenal scenery that constantly surrounds you in the Inside Passage. South Marble Island is a haul out for the stellar sea lions. It's also home to lots of exotic Alaskan birds, which you never see in northern Michigan. Birds like horned and tufted puffins, oyster catchers, merlets, scopes. There's always lots and lots of bald eagles flying around.
Yeah, I didn't.
There used to be lots of these critters on North Marble Island, but the trees got so large that the eagles started preying on the birds, so all the birds moved then to South Marble Island because eagles couldn't come there. Those are some puffins in the water. Now we're viewing the Johns Hopkins Glacier area in Glacier Bay. Many years back, this entire area was covered by glaciers. That's now the valley that the water and the boat are ensconced in. There's the Johns Hopkins Glacier, named because they asked people from the university to come up here and explore and study the glaciers. There's Letty and her yellow slicker. It's rather cold when you get close to the glaciers, of course. And here we're motoring along through Glacier Bay, heading back down toward an area called Bartlett Cove down at the south end of Glacier Bay. Here we see one of the sea otters diving down. Usually when they're floating, they rest on their backs. Here's another view of our cruise ship. We have kayaks on the back end that people can go out in. We went over to the state park area where they had the bones of a humpback whale. It had taken more than a year to prepare the bones, and they had a Tlingit Indian lodge meeting house, which had just been prepared, but they were ready to dedicate it a few days later. There's another view of our cruise ship. Letty and I went out in the kayaks. We had to wear these little aprons to keep us dry. The kayaks had steering mechanism you used your feet on. Here I am with a bare tooth kind of fooling around, and Letty as well with tasting a piece of seaweed. But we had better things to eat than that, such as this dessert at one of the dinners, key lime pie. Then we left Bartlett Cove, headed down Chatham Strait for a place called Freshwater Cove, which didn't really have fresh water, but had lots of rivers running into it. Here I am kayaking with a lady from Australia while Buddy was kind of taking the afternoon off. Here we see humpback diving and another brief view of that whale. We had numerous kayaks at the back of the ship that we could use, and we also went on shore excursions. They called it meanders, but some of the terrain was rather rough. Here we see some giant slugs on shore. Everything is very wet, of course, being a rainforest. And there's lots and lots of bald eagles. There's only about one day that I didn't see bald eagles on the whole trip. Some days I saw as many as 50. And plenty of little sea creatures around the shores that we explored. You're constantly walking on mussels and barnacles and have little limpets in the pools and tiny little crabs scurrying about. And sea stars, if you're lucky. Nice red sea star we saw on the island. And the island had its own resident eagles, which we on one of our skiff rides, we were treated to seeing an eagle swoop down and grab a fish out of the water. Here's one of our informative skiff guides. Here's Letty at the stern of the vessel. We had great viewing from the bow, the stern. Just walking out of our room onto the balcony, we could see whales, porpoises, fantastic scenery. Here's one of the skiffs that we would ride to see the whales and other natural critters up close. Here's some Dall's porpoises that rode along with our boat in the Frederick Sound area. For some reason, they like to do this bow riding. I guess they enjoy the swift currents caused by the movement of the boat. They look a bit like orcas, but they're much smaller, of course. And they're a type of porpoise, Dall's porpoise. Of course, orcas are truly porpoises too. They're not really whales. So we moved from Frederick Sound over to the east and went into Stevens Sound. We were treated to a fantastic rainbow, which actually extended end to end. I don't believe I've ever seen one that actually you could see from one full end to the other. We saw very few human habitations like this lighthouse on our trip. Here we are in the stern of the vessel where they had a nice hot tub.
Hey, Bob.
But there was lots of room to move around and see things. We didn't indulge in the polar plunge, which some of the passengers did. Here we're moving up toward the Dawes Glacier in Stevens Sound. You can start to see the little bits of ice in the water. Larger chunks are called bergy bits. If they're more than 15 feet, they can call them an iceberg. There's some seals, harbor seals. Here we're motoring along. There's another cruise ship there in the distance. Just a fabulous, beautiful day. Always fantastic, breathtaking scenery all around with the snow-capped mountains, the sunny days that we had a few of, and many cloudy days. Lots of gulls on the icebergs. There's the spout of a humpback whale. The incredible blue of these bergy bits and icebergs is really something to behold. And I'm not sure if it's because there's somewhat different minerals or because the ice is so compressed that they get that blue color. They come in lots of interesting shapes and sizes. Here we're proceeding up toward the Dawes Glacier. Passing blue icebergs and white snow-capped mountains and waterfalls. You can hear the wind whipping in the background, a bit windy and chilly at times. Definitely wanted to dress for cold weather at times. It almost looks like a track on the Dawes Glacier, but really those are what they call lateral moraines, where some other adjoining glaciers deposited sand and silt into this Dawes Glacier. We got to see many of the glaciers on the trip calving or dropping lumps of ice into the water. Lots of beautiful, fantastic waterfalls. Most of these have no names, even though they're exquisite and bigger than much of what we have in Michigan.
Straight forward, there's like little chunks right there.
More views of the Dawes Glacier. We were so chilly we got to have hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps. Here we are back in civilization, the Pellston Airport. The end.